How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Tuesday, May 14th. I got another great show planned for you guys today, starting off with another massive deal that hit the NFL 2 days ago now regarding the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their safety, Antoine Winfield. I'll get into that first, plus a brewing sort of conflict, you could say, within the Philadelphia Eagles between their normal style of doing things and now with Vic Fangio coming in there, how he could try and shake things up with the amount of practice time they're having currently, as well as also later in the show talking about more on the Chicago Bears, and now this time moving the focus onto their wide receiver group and how their first round pick, Rome Odunze, can sort of carve out a role for himself in that Bears offense. What could that look like? Stick around and I'll tell you more about that. All of that is coming up on today's show. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the first topic, as always, a reminder to you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, your question will pop up on my screen here, and that way get your guys' thoughts and perspective on anything that I say or on the topic at hand. It's a massive help for this show. So again, if you could, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. But like I mentioned before, we'll start off with another massive deal that hit the NFL recently. Antoine Winfield Jr. got that extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's been a while for this extension to kind of been brewing. Antoine Winfield was one of the two remaining players that was franchise tagged and that still hadn't received the deal. Michael Pittman received the deal, Josh Allen, Brian Burns. Even though some of them were traded and some stayed with their team, L'Jarius Sneed, another one, Antoine Winfield still remained with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, franchise tagged with the idea that the Buccaneers and Antoine Winfield were going to work out a long-term deal eventually. That day finally came. I talked about it before. I want to say it was about a month, almost a month, since I last talked about ESPN's Adam Schefter reporting that a deal was close. More things had to be worked out since that point, but we finally got to this point, and the official new contract for Antoine Winfield is a 4-year, $84.1 million deal, which is the total value, and Antoine Winfield will receive $45 million guaranteed. If you do the quick math, that's about $21.025 million per year, making him the highest paid defensive back in the NFL currently. Why I mentioned the .025 is because that is the total difference between him and the second highest paid defensive back in the NFL, which is Jair Alexander. Small margins, people. We're talking about the smallest of margins here to make Antoine Winfield the highest paid defensive back, but that is what the situation is now. It's a massive deal, not only for Antoine Winfield, but it's sort of notable just because out of the top 6 highest paid defensive backs in the NFL, 5 of them were defensive backs. Jair Alexander, Denzel Ward, Jalen Ramsey. Those guys were some of the names up there, and the highest paid safety at the time was Derwin James. Now Antoine Winfield jumps in ahead of him and to the top of the list on top of all the defensive backs to earn the most money on an average yearly basis. I mentioned Derwin James was the highest paid. Before that, Minkah Fitzpatrick was also up there. Now he slides to third, Derwin's at second, and Antoine Winfield takes that number 1 spot. And Winfield, like I mentioned, I will get into it a little bit towards the end of this segment, but being one of the last 2 free agents or just players to get the franchise tag, the other one being T. Higgins. Now T. Higgins stands alone there as the only player to not receive a long-term extension. I'll get into that whole situation in just a second, but before this, on that franchise tag, Antoine Winfield was set to make about $17 million per year, or just on that 1-year franchise tag. And with Winfield only being 25, It would have been more of a prove-it year next year if he was to play good again and earn himself another long-term deal. But this is a massive win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, not only because you get Antoine Winfield right as he, crazy enough to say, is just entering his prime years, still only 25 like I mentioned, and to get him on a massive 4-year deal, he's going to be there most likely the rest of his career, depending on how well he plays, avoiding injuries and whatnot. By the end of this contract, 29, 30 years old, then you can work out another deal. It's a great move for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, especially because just in simplest terms, he earned it, coming off of arguably his best season, 122 tackles, 12 passes defended, 3 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries, 6 sacks, made the first team All-Pro this past season for the first time, and also this was sort of getting closer and closer to being dealt and getting done, similarly to yesterday with the Detroit Lions and Jared Goff. On Friday, Brad Holmes talked about it, how close they were, how he desired to figure out an extension for Amon-Ra, Penei Sewell, back-to-back with Jared Goff. He alluded to it being close on Friday, and similarly, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, their general manager, Jason Licht, also talked about it last week on the Pat McAfee show briefly, and he basically pretty much said the same thing as Brad Holmes, and one thing he alluded to was, he said, he's the best safety in the league, he should be paid like it, and many people wouldn't take it so literally, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers kept to their word, kept to their general manager's word, and now reward Antoine Winfield pretty nicely with this massive deal, and now, like I mentioned before, this was almost a month ago how the reports were sort of getting to a point where, the deal was close. It's a lot harder to finally get it over the line than a lot of people think. But this is massive, not just for Winfield to get that reassurance, be paid very nicely for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just to get one of their best playmakers back, but also you think about it whole picture-wise, they get Antoine Winfield back, Mike Evans back as well, 2 years, a 2-year deal, albeit, and also they get their starting quarterback back in Baker Mayfield. When you looked at their to-do list at the start of this offseason, you look at those 3 guys and you might be thinking to yourself, there might be a good chance that one of these guys, maybe a couple of these guys, wouldn't be able to come back, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers made it happen, coming off of a division title as well, and doing pretty well in the playoffs for how well they started. This is a massive achievement for their front office, for them as a team, to continue on with this core group of players, to try and build off of what they did last year. And now, shifting back over to that topic I mentioned briefly just a few minutes ago, that leaves T. Higgins now, as the only player to be franchise tagged and not get a deal signed. Antoine Winfield, this deal, like I mentioned before, it was brewing. It was something that was coming for a long time now, and you could just see from when he was franchise tagged until now, almost 2 months passed before anything got done. T. Higgins has been on that sort of trajectory. That the only difference is that T. Higgins has requested a trade already. He wasn't really satisfied with the pace that the negotiations were going at. Currently, he requested a trade, but then a few weeks after that, he sort of gave in a little bit to accepting that he's just going to play with the Cincinnati Bengals now. Now, I'm curious, and you guys are free to also comment on this with the chat box. I'm curious now to see how he sort of responds to this. Not like Antoine Winfield doesn't deserve to be one of the highest paid players at his position. I think this was well deserved. A lot of people don't talk about Antoine Winfield, but the way people talk about T. Higgins and him also being 25, 24 years old currently, I think more attention is put on wide receivers and more of the spotlight goes on wide receivers for T. Higgins just to be sitting there like almost feeling ignored by his team with how important their wide receiver core is to Joe Burrow and how much success that they've had. To see a safety get paid before him and how his whole situation has just been dragged on even after he's requested a trade. I want to see how that develops and how T. Higgins talks about it. I'm sure he'll be asked about it in the next few days, weeks, the rest of the offseason if he again reassures that he wants to be traded he seemed pretty mild about it now, pretty tame about staying with the Cincinnati Bengals. But now I'm wondering if he'll be pretty annoyed that this happened, if or just how he'll respond to being the only player to be franchise tagged and not get a long term deal done. That is all going to play out the rest of the offseason, I'm sure, if the Bengals don't end up dealing him. They've given no inclination that they want to trade him, so how that dynamic breaks down will be something to monitor. But again, Antoine Winfield gets a much-deserved contract extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to sort of continue on their quest to regaining the NFC North Championship. After the Atlanta Falcons got better, the Panthers got inevitably better. Might not be the toughest of competition, but they're getting better, and the Saints are there as well. The NFC South, something to keep an eye on, maybe a two-horse race there, but it will be entertaining nonetheless. But in the meantime, we will continue on with the show. We'll head into a quick break right now, and on the other side of it, I'll talk more about the Philadelphia Eagles bringing in Vic Fangio as their new defensive coordinator and how he wants to implement some new old-school ideas back into the Philadelphia Eagles, plus talking about the Chicago Bears once again, how they plan to implement their first-round pick, Rome Odunze, into their offense and how that wide receiver group will pan out in 2024. So stick with me. We're going to a quick break, and we'll be right back in just a few seconds.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. To jump right into our next segment, more on the Philadelphia Eagles. Last season didn't really pan out the way that they did, at least the end of last season. They started 10-1, and then they went on a bad streak of losing games and just crashing out of the playoffs in the first round against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we just finished talking about. Now, they made a few changes. They got a new offensive coordinator. They brought in Vic Fangio to be their new defensive coordinator after they let go of Sean Desai. And Vic Fangio also was rumored to be just wanting to be in Philadelphia. He had an appreciation for the Eagles and his connections there, so he wanted to be there as much as the Eagles wanted him to come be their defensive coordinator. So that all worked out, and it all seems perfect right at the start. He wants to come back. The Eagles want him to come in. It all seems perfect. Everything's just going to fit in well right from the start. Well, that was the case until this whole operation started rolling out, and Vic Fangio pretty much got surprised or just wasn't expecting how much rest Philadelphia offers their players. Vic Fangio met last week with media on Philadelphia's minimal practice time over the last few years, and they asked him about it. Clearly had something to say or felt a certain way about it in his response, which was, "You've got to make do with what you've got, but I keep pushing for more within reason. I'm not proposing we go to 2-a-days and do, North Dallas 40. He mentioned that, and that opened up this whole topic and this just bigger idea around practice time and just this new, generation attitude around athletes nowadays. You see it in basketball. People talk about it all the time, how the game's softer. Same thing with the NFL, I guess you could also say, with the rules Now the hip drop tackle is being taken out. You can't touch the quarterback. You can't hit the quarterback the wrong way. Offensive players are overly protected. All that sort of stuff that you hear every NFL season, every off season with any rule changes and whatnot. It sort of opens the door into that avenue. But to give a little bit more context with just the Eagles and what their situation has been for the last few years, last summer, from the start of training camp to the first preseason game, the Philadelphia Eagles had 9 practices, 5 walkthroughs, and 3 days off. It has been a common just topic that Nick Sirianni really likes walkthroughs. He really values them more so than other coaches who just want to go full on and practice with their teams. To each his own. That's what Nick Sirianni values. Almost as much as practices, because they could run through as many plays, or the same amount of plays at least, in the same amount of time, and staying within the CBA rules by doing more walkthroughs. Also, around November time, usually when they're in the full throttle of the NFL season, usually Nick Sirianni and his coaching staff replaces the Thursday practices for another walkthrough. So again, they're kind of not taking their foot off of the pedal, but they're not maybe going as hard as other teams on Thursdays. Other teams usually practice there, go through a walkthrough on Friday, or take it later on Friday, then one final run through on Saturday before their Sunday game. But Nick Sirianni takes it a little bit easier on his players, and now that might come to a surprise for a lot of people, not knowing how light Sirianni takes it on his players. But who knows? It all comes with a certain caveat with it. There might be more off days, but they could go harder on the days that they practice, right? They're all certain variables and just different things that go into a head coach's method. But just looking at it, big picture, it looks like Nick Sirianni is going a bit easier on their players. And if people want to point to that as being the reason why they had such a fall off last year, well, they pretty much did the same thing during their Super Bowl run a few years ago. So it's hard to point to that as the real reason why they had such a bad finish to the year last season. And also, Nick Sirianni, as much as some people don't want to give him the credit, as much as people maybe would like to scapegoat him for some of the bad results that followed the Philadelphia Eagles recently, in his first 3 years there as head coach in Philadelphia, they have spent the least amount of time on the practice field than anybody else. But Nick Sirianni, in his couple seasons there, Philadelphia is 34-17 under Nick Sirianni, and that is the 5th best record in the NFL since 2021. Usually also training camp sessions around the NFL are also under 90 minutes, so you take that with the fact that Nick Sirianni, in his first 3 seasons there, the Eagles spent the least amount of time on the practice field than any other team. Already, you don't have a long practice, usually because of the rules around trying to protect players now and trying to keep them from harming themselves. There's always talk about the 2-a-day practices and how that wasn't doing the players any good, so they brought in more strict rules to try and prevent players, keep them as healthy as possible. So the practices already are about an hour and a half. Then you have Nick Sirianni adding more walkthroughs, and people might just not be comfortable with this. I don't know for Philadelphia Eagles fans if they were aware of this or if they feel a certain way about this. I can tell you that Vic Fangio really was just surprised by this, was not a big fan of it. Now that he is in the full swing of trying to take command of this defense and trying to bring back a certain attitude and a certain charisma around this team that was really lacking last season. They got the business handed to them a lot of times, just not being able to stop the run, not being able to cover people, and the secondary was banged up, but also when they were healthy, it wasn't very good. So he's trying to reestablish some sort of attitude, tough-minded, old-school defensive attitude that he's accustomed to, and really where he started off his coaching career from. He's coming from an attitude or an era where there was always 2-a-day. The stories you hear from that time period of the 2-a-day practices and just how grueling it was for the players, that's where Vic Fangio is coming from, and I'm just assuming he's trying to bring as much of that back to the Philadelphia Eagles, but this also just carries into a bigger topic. I think the way Vic Fangio carried it on in his interviews with the media, he went on to say that he just believes that players now are cuddled at such a young age that instead of trying to push them to do more and more, people just take the brakes off or take the gas off a little bit and just cuddle them a little bit more, try to protect them from themselves. And from his experience, he went on to say that when he has pushed players, when he has seen players being pushed, they usually respond more often than not. And just more on that topic, how Vic Fangio really put it in his statement was, people are not expecting as much out of players as we used to expect. These players will work and give you everything they've got within reason. It starts at an early age when they're in high school, college. Everybody is less than more of a type thing. Preserve your energy. The players are willing to work. Never had an issue with that, and they're still willing to work. But we, as the so-called adults in the room, need to push them. And it just sort of carries on further than just simply wanting more practice time. It seems for Vic Fangio carrying this on to a more macro sort of perspective with talking about just the entire process of these players not being pushed, not being, garnered or nurtured into trying to push further and further with their practice time. And you look at it, maybe he has a point, at some point in this whole process of changing the rules and trying to take some of the pressure off of the quarterback getting hit with as well, not trying to take too much away from defensive players. I think it has gone to a point where the NFL has pushed too far in one direction. Now, to try and reel it back and make it a bit more even, it will take some time, but that's where, unfortunately, depending on where you stand, that's where the NFL is right now. That's where it seems to be trending. And also, if, say, the NFL tried to bring back more practices, or if the Eagles allowed Vic Fangio to have more practices, maybe limited to 2 walkthroughs or 1 walkthrough instead of 5, like Nick Sirianni has typically done it, maybe the negatives of that now is to try and implement it into these guys that have been so used to one method. To suddenly try and change that, it could lead to more injuries. It could lead to a shock that they're just not used to it. Trying to readjust to that, athletes at the highest level, I would assume, are very habit-like creatures, very habit-like people that need everything to be a certain way for them to perform and not really think about all these extra factors. By throwing that in, that might alter how some of them perform, how some of them approach the game, if their routine is thrown off. That's just me assuming this. Obviously, I'm no professional athlete, so to talk about it and just give my opinion on it, just from listening to other players talk about it, it seems like that seems to be their sort of MO, how they go about things. And also, just to close out this segment, this just seems like again, Vic Fangio, old school sort of type of coach, trying to bring back this hard mentality into the Philadelphia Eagles, speaking his mind on how he doesn't like the NFL nowadays. That is just more of the typical older coaches, older players, former players talking about the NFL now and how it's gone soft. Maybe he went a bit too far, going full-blown attack mode on the new generation now, but he does have a point in some way, just saying that it has gone too far in one direction. I agree with him there, but how this all sort of fixes itself now and going forward, I think it'll take way too long for there to be any change. But Vic Fangio wants more practices with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's sort of just trying to accumulate or just accustom himself to the way the Eagles run things now. Will there be a compromise there with Sirianni? That will yet to be seen. But at the end of the day, how they try and change something, they want different results from what they had last year. Maybe this is the avenue to go with Vic Fangio bringing in these new ideas. But again, you don't want to push too far one way and the players don't respond the way that you want. But both coaches, both sides seem pretty adamant about it as of now. we'll see if they finally get it. We're not really into the full training camp, OTAs, mandatory minicamp just yet. So once those start, maybe it'll give us a better sign as to which way the Philadelphia Eagles are sort of trending to. But for now, in the meantime, we will move on with the show. More topics to talk about on today's episode. I mentioned the Chicago Bears' plan for Rome Odunze to try and incorporate him fully into their offense. Trey Hendrickson, an update on his situation and how the contract negotiations are going with him now that he made his return to practice on Monday, as well as looking at the New England Patriots rookie minicamp. What are people saying about it? What are my thoughts on it? All of that is coming up with the rest of the show today, so stick with us. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Rolling right along with the rest of the show, jumping into the third topic now on today's episode, the fellow first-round pick of the Chicago Bears, Rome Odunze. How does he fit in now with the offense? You look at Caleb Williams. I talked about him yesterday, how he's just shining right now, impressing everybody and whatnot. But Rome Odunze also has been pretty impressive during camp. He actually didn't practice one of the days during rookie minicamp for hamstring tightness, but it all has been going as you'd expect for Rome Odunze. We talked about Caleb Williams yesterday, and now Rome Odunze is also one to just not sweep under the so-called rug right now, because he can bring a lot to the Chicago Bears offense. Obviously, when they drafted him, there was some questions about, is it going to be Rome Odunze? Are they going to address the defensive side of the ball? Are they going to trade back and try and accumulate more picks to build out a more well-balanced roster? Well, at the end of the day, it seemed like Ryan Poles and just the entire Chicago Bears team felt that Rome Odunze was always going to be their pick if he was there. They ended up making the pick, and now the question is, how do they sort of carve out a role for Rome Odunze, and how does he really contribute to that to try and contribute to this whole project that the Chicago Bears have built, adding to that skill player group. You have Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. They brought in DeAndre Swift, Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet's there as well. There's a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball that, it almost seems hard to not be able to score points with this group, especially with Caleb Williams picking up the offense as quickly as we talked about yesterday. It all seems to be going very well for them, and Odunze also adding to those skill-based group. He shouldn't go unnoticed just because I know all the other players have experience in the NFL. They sort of know what they're doing, even though it's a new team for Keenan Allen, Gerald Everett, and DeAndre Swift. They're just NFL players. They're pros. They know what they're doing. Rome Odunze is sort of coming into this whole situation with an opportunity to learn from some of the best in Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. And I think that'll help him out tremendously. What sort of role specifically he carves out for himself, that's yet to be determined through training camp and the entire NFL season. But right now, the wide receiver coach for the Chicago Bears, Chris Beatty, already sort of has a game plan, a mold, a vision, if you will, for Rome Odunze, and really just all three of the wide receivers. Speaking to the media over the weekend, he said, you start with DJ. He's one of the best in the world with the ball in his hands. Keenan, having worked with him in the last couple of years, does a little bit of everything. He works third downs like nobody's business. And Rome can complement them by being a contested catcher outside of the numbers. By saying that, he addressed every receiver, and it seems like they have a guy for every scenario that you can think of in the NFL. Short yardage, yards after catch, deep threat, intermediate routes, down the middle of the field, post routes, and everything like that. The route running, Keenan Allen is one of the best at doing that. DJ Moore, yards after the catch, amazing at doing that. Hard to bring down with just one guy, just the way that he's built. And Rome Odunze, the way I see him, just almost a hybrid of both of them. He's a very, very talented route runner, can get vertical on any defensive back, and also great at the point of the catch against anybody, at least during his time in Washington. He is sort of that perfect mold you get from DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, and that's only going to help the Bears' chances of succeeding this season. It seems like they have that guy for every scenario, like I mentioned, but also Coach Beatty also mentioned how Rome can learn from these two receivers and try maybe gets a different skill set, a different look on some things that he might not be doing well at the point in time where he is right now, being a rookie. Obviously, he has a lot to learn. And on that topic, Coach Beatty talked about comparing DJ Moore to being that sort of bull in a china shop. Keenan Allen is more like painting the edges on a Picasso. Very odd choice of words, but you can get the message. Keenan Allen is a lot more finesse. DJ Moore, very physical at the point of attack. Yards after the catch, like I mentioned, hard to bring him down. Rome Odunze can do a little bit of both, and I just think learning the ins and outs of both of them can help benefit Rome Odunze, and not just him, but also Caleb Williams. If you have three guys that can pretty much do everything and can just learn from each other as well. The whole idea of this segment is talking about how much Rome can learn from these two guys and how much he can contribute, but also Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, I'm sure learning off of each other can only help this team get to where they have envisioned that they will end at the end of this season. So it all just sort of molds into a perfect way where Chicago can maybe find an identity in their offensive players. It's still early doors in this whole situation, and it's still a point where you don't really know what this offense is going to look like. But with Caleb picking up the offense, you have Keenan Allen, an experienced veteran in there, DJ Moore coming off of the season that he just had, and Rome Odunze. I think, one, the Bears have to sort of figure out how they want to run this whole operation. Do they let just Caleb Williams run the show completely, let him sling it around the yard and have no real reins on him to try and hold him back? Or do they take a more just controlled approach to this, run the ball a lot with DeAndre Swift, use the tight ends a lot more? How they decipher between that, I'm sure they're going to have a better picture of it as the offseason goes on. But it seems like Rome Odunze right now, like most rookies will, it seems like he is sort of just absorbing everything that he needs. He acknowledges the bigger picture of how this rookie season could go and what sort of mentality he wants to attack it with by saying, I'm going to run every route and do every concept to perfection, even if I'm not the main read or they're the main read, because I think that's what it's about when the brotherhood is in that room. I think that speaks volumes to not only the kind of player Rome Odunze is, but really the sort of people that the Chicago Bears want to have in this building. Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus, and just the entire Chicago Bears organization talked about it. I want to say this past weekend or at some point this offseason, how they're not just looking at the type of skill set, the talent that they could bring into the Chicago Bears. Everybody has talent. That's why they spent so much time with Caleb Williams, and they made it a real talking point, a real main point with Caleb to try and get to know the person, trying to get to see how he clicks, how he operates, and that's why they felt he was a good fit in Chicago. That's why I'm sure they feel the same way about Rome Odunze. And also Shane Waldron, coming in as the offensive coordinator, had a pretty successful and underrated season with the Seattle Seahawks last year, and how just Geno Smith looked and just DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, how he used all of his pieces there to the best of their abilities to try and maximize that offense. And I don't think it's crazy to say that the Chicago Bears at this point in time probably have a more talented offense than the Seattle Seahawks had last season. So just imagine what he could do with this offense. I think that's another thing to point out, and how not just the wide receiver coach, Coach Beatty, can incorporate Rome Odunze, what he thinks of him, but also how Shane Waldron comes in here, new offensive coordinator, how he gets to learn everybody's best attributes and how to maximize all of them. I think that will play itself out as it should, at the pace that it should. Now, that's the offensive side of the ball. To wrap it up and just give you a whole balanced answer to this, the other side of the ball, the defense, not much has been brought on that defense this offseason to try and improve it. There hasn't been a bunch of signings on that side of the ball. So how they sort of respond and maybe improve this season will be another massive just contributor to this whole operation with the Bears. If the defense can be better than okay, average, get some stops here or there, I think it'll be massive for Caleb Williams, who is still just a rookie. We're talking about him like he is 3 years into his career. If the defense can come in there and get some stops and be better than average, better than the threshold of the average NFL defense, I think this team can be very, very successful. Maybe not get to the playoffs or win a playoff game in their first season, but really be competitive, set the foundation to the type of team they want to be, and then go on from there. I think they're doing it all right as of this moment, but a lot more can happen positively and negatively to affect the whole situation. But right now, they're really taking advantage of this honeymoon phase, and everybody seems to be eating it up, especially me. But in the meantime, we will continue on with the show. A few more topics to discuss on today's show. Trey Hendrickson made his return back to the Cincinnati Bengals practice on Monday, sort of contradicting his stance on requesting a trade and wanting a better contract. I'll get more into those details in just a few seconds. Plus, we're going to be talking about the rookie minicamp for the New England Patriots. What was said, what were some things that people took note of, and what I think about the whole situation with Drake May, with Joe Milton as well being thrown in there in some of the discussions around rookie minicamp. All of that coming up in the remainder of the show. Stick around with us. We'll be right back after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We're going to get into Trey Hendrickson and his whole situation with the Cincinnati Bengals, but before that, I want to remind you guys one last time on this show, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your questions pop up in my chat box, and that way I can read it on air and just get your guys' feel, perspective on anything I say or on anything regarding the topic on hand. It's a massive help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. So if you could, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. We greatly appreciate it anytime you guys are able to use that. But moving on with the show and the next topic on hand, Trey Hendrickson back at Cincinnati's practices this week. The major talking point around Hendrickson and the Cincinnati Bengals after T. Higgins requested a trade. Then you have probably your best pass rusher also requesting a trade. And if you're a Bengals fan or just anybody covering the Bengals, you're sort of thinking like, whoa, what's going on? Why is everybody requesting a trade? How is it going to affect this season? But fortunately for the Bengals, it all sort of has just calmed down over the last few weeks. I mentioned before on this episode, T. Higgins has sort of accepted that he's going to be on the Bengals. Then you have Trey Hendrickson not being too adamant to too strict on his point about wanting to leave. The biggest point about Trey Hendrickson is wanting that better contract, wanting that more long-term assurance that comes with a better contract. He requested a trade about a month ago now in an effort to try and get that new contract from the Bengals, and for now he had been skipping Cincinnati's voluntary workouts until yesterday at the start of the week when the Bengals began phase 2. And in his return, of course, like you would expect, a lot of local media was there, seeing Trey Hendrickson back in the building. Obviously, they're going to approach him and get his thoughts on where everything stands right now. And to be honest, Trey Hendrickson gave a pretty surprising response to what I was expecting when he said, "This is where separating business and the team is difficult. At what point am I contradicting what I want? Long-term, winning games, all those things are what I want to do here in Cincinnati, and removing myself from the team doesn't help the team." So he gave that response, and it wasn't really what I was expecting, Coming back to practice is one thing. Probably holding firm on your stance is the way I thought he was going to go. He signed that one-year extension last July to make $14 million this coming season, and then an additional $16 million in 2025. But as it stands right now, he wants that more long-term security with his deal. That's why he requested the trade. Why I wasn't expecting that sort of response, because that's something a lot of these players take very seriously. Football, I don't have to mention it, it's a very dangerous sport. It's something to not be taken for granted. And getting that long-term assurance is something most players, rightly so, want to do. Especially after Trey Hendrickson last season, being 29 years old, I want to say tied for second in the league for the most sacks with 17 and a half. His average salary right now is $21 million per year, which ranks 11th at his position, and there are 14 players, total edge rushers, really, that make more than him this season, and that will make more in the coming season as well. So you think about that, Trey Hendrickson, the kind of player, the kind of value that he brings to his team. Are there 14 players better than him doing the same thing that he does, getting to the quarterback? I would struggle naming 14 players right now that I would take ahead of Trey Hendrickson. So that's why it really surprised me, the way Trey Hendrickson approached this. I was thinking, heading into this segment, talking about it, has anything changed with Cincinnati and Trey Hendrickson and each of their standpoints on it? It seems like Trey Hendrickson has sort of just given in to this idea of wanting to be with the Bengals and just thinking long term and thinking really just on the field, wanting to win a Super Bowl, coming close in 2021, and then in 2022 reaching the AFC Championship there. In his time with the Bengals, they have been pretty successful, so they've been 31-19 with his 3 years there in Cincinnati. So it's hard to pull away from that success and trying your luck somewhere else. If you really want that assurance long term, you would, to me at least, try everything you can to get that long-term money, even if you have to hold out right now at this point of the season. I thought that was the approach he was going to go with, but instead he comes back and really just put a bow on this whole mindset, his whole process of thinking in this situation by saying, "My mindset is to win a Super Bowl, and I think we've got the quarterback and the pieces to do it here in Cincinnati." And that just shows everybody what sort of energy Trey Hendrickson is coming with this season, what he really values. And it is honorable, I guess, for a player. It's refreshing to see a player talk about it like this, because it seems now that when it comes to this point, when players are in a contract year or they want more money long term to assure their future, their health in the NFL and just playing football, it seems like it all just goes through the same process. You talk about it, you don't get what you want, then you threaten maybe holding out, you actually do it. You do it until the renegotiation process starts again. Then you sort of get into it, and if you get a good feeling about it, then you come back, and then the announcement is usually made after that by applying that extra pressure. But Trey Hendrickson really put that all to the side and put his dreams, his hopes of trying to win a Super Bowl above that. It is refreshing to see. You don't often see that, like I just mentioned, and it seems that he is more adamant about wanting to be there more than anything. And really tying it back with T. Higgins, it seems like he wants to be there more than T. Higgins at this moment. T. Higgins, although he did admit to just accepting he wants to play there in Cincinnati, I just think Trey Hendrickson talked about it with more passion and just showed that, he really cares about a Super Bowl and winning it specifically with the Bengals. Whereas T. Higgins, I just think maybe he wasn't feeling it that day at his youth camp to answer questions to the media. At that point in time, it didn't seem like he really felt a need to answer that question with as much passion, but he seems more adamant about staying there, and age being a factor also, I think ties into Trey Hendrickson's response. He is 29, gonna be 30 this year. Maybe there does come that realization at some point where you think, wow, like I'm almost 30, how much more can I really go? How much better of an opportunity can I get to win a Super Bowl than the Cincinnati Bengals right now? I think that's a fair question to ask, and maybe Trey Hendrickson had that go through his head, maybe not, but that is something I think is important to point out here. If Trey Hendrickson came to that realization, maybe he just figured staying with the Cincinnati Bengals is something more. Again, with T. Higgins, he's 25 years old. He still has a lot more time than Trey Hendrickson in the NFL, most likely. So that is something that plays into it. And also, the other side of this, if it all goes bad, say there is no Super Bowl this year, T. Higgins plays on that franchise tag, and then he ends up leaving. Talking about worst case scenario, Trey Hendrickson decides to stay, doesn't push for that extra money, that extra long-term assurance. He stays, T. Higgins leaves, and they don't win a Super Bowl this year. Where does that put Trey Hendrickson in the list of needs for the Cincinnati Bengals? Because he will be 30 or 31 years old heading into next season. If he comes off of another great season, that's awesome, but where does he fall in line with the priorities of the Bengals? If they lose T. Higgins, then they don't win another Super Bowl. Will he have the same leverage and same pushing points that he has this season coming off of a career year than he will next year? That's all up in the air. He could have a great year, he could not, but it is an unknown, and it is a risk I think it's worth pointing out at this moment. It's not a massive gamble because I do expect the Bengals to be good, but it is something to think about. Worst case scenario, if this goes south, how does that affect Trey Hendrickson getting another contract at all? It is something to monitor, and it is something to consider, I think. I'm sure Trey Hendrickson has thought about it, but I'm sure everything is being kept positive with him at this point in time, so nobody wants to think about that for the Bengals, but I thought it was interesting to bring up and something to watch as the Cincinnati Bengals head closer and closer to really ramping up the intensity, as are all the other NFL teams across the league. And in saying that, we will move on and talking about that intensity, how much of that was in place during the New England Patriots rookie minicamp. We had some impressions from Drake May. A lot of people were surprised by fellow rookie quarterback Joe Milton and his arm strength, and more just on the overall atmosphere around rookie minicamp for the New England Patriots and what their head coach Rod Mayo had to say as well. That's coming up in a few seconds after this last break for us on the show. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining me back here for the last segment of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to recap what went down at New England's rookie minicamp. Obviously, the biggest points around it were Drake May. How does he look, and how does this all sort of start this long process, not only for Drake May, but for everybody there in the Patriots, starting a new era after Bill Belichick, now under head coach Gerard Mayo. New general manager, quote unquote. Is he the general manager, Elliot Wolf, I'm talking about? Is he the executive vice president of player personnel? He does the same thing. He does some of what a general manager would do. Everything is just so new, and this was really the first step at how everything would be conducted in this new era post-Bill Belichick. It was this past weekend where the Patriots held their rookie minicamp, and just some of the things to note, some of the things people took note of were not Drake May's arm, but fellow rookie quarterback Joe Milton's arm. Really impressed with just the sheer strength of it all, the sheer just explosion, it seemed, that the ball came off of his arm with. That was something I think a lot of people weren't expecting, maybe being accustomed to seeing Bailey Zappi, Mac Jones, not to throw any shade on them, but I guess it was a massive difference with the strength in arm of Joe Milton compared to those two guys, and also Drake May as well was right there with Joe Milton, but Joe Milton's definitely left a lot more people shocked than Drake May. On the topic of Drake May, he also flashed some of that arm strength that he showed on his pro day, and also some precision on some of his throws, and some okay misses. There are some decent misses, and there's just really bad, what the heck misses by some rookie quarterbacks. It only just seemed to be placement issues with Drake May as of right now, but those were the biggest takeaways. May, also, it is worth noting that he did take the starter snaps in rookie minicamp, so he led the first group out there. He took command, and the poise that he showed in the first run of it with the first team rookie offense said a lot of it as well. But it is just hard to decipher right now too much on where Drake May is, where really any of these rookies are at this point, but it seemed okay. Not as much hype and as much wow coming from the New England Patriots camp than it did with Caleb Williams and everybody just talking very highly of him. Same thing with J.J. McCarthy, how they spoke about him and how he learned the playbook so fast and everything like that. It wasn't to that level, but at the same time, nothing too bad here from the New England Patriots camp. And just on Drake May, it seemed like everything went okay for Drake May. And also, head coach Gerard Mayo was asked about his early thoughts about May, and looking at it right now through a very, very fine microscope here, only having a few practices with just the rookies, in which he said, look, he has a lot to work on, but I have no doubt that he will put the time in. You guys didn't see him out here yesterday, meaning Friday, but he was out here all night trying to get on the same page as everybody else. And Gerard Mayo also emphasized Alex Van Pelt, their new offensive coordinator, as the main teacher, communicator to Drake May, in order not to overwhelm him too much with too many voices. It could be Gerard Mayo, Alex Van Pelt, Ben McAdoo, who's also an assistant there, to try not to overwhelm him. He emphasized to everybody that Alex Van Pelt will be the main guy, trying to help Drake May learn as much as possible with this offense, and just trying to run the show as best as he can, as quickly as he understands and really takes in the playbook. That also will go hand in hand with all of this. But also, people asked Drake May about it, his overall thoughts on how rookie minicamp went just from that day in practice. And Drake May said, and I think under center stance, there's a lot I'm trying out that's new. 2 new stances that I'm getting used to. I feel pretty good out there today. And that was pretty interesting just to me, because those were some pretty technical, mechanical sort of things that he is working on, or that he decided to talk about in his responses, talking about learning the under center stance. And there's two other stances that he's trying to learn and just trying to get used to it all with not just the plays and everything, but how mechanically everything is supposed to work, which was the one of the biggest talking points leading up to the draft and how everybody evaluated Drake May. The biggest thing I took away from it was that, throwing wise, mechanics wise, learning some of those more and just developing that at a pro level will help him grow mostly, and those were some of the biggest things that he needed to work on. So the fact that he touched on it a little bit or alluded to the fact, I think it just falls right in line with what everybody assumed would be the growing pains, the learning curve for Drake May. So that falls in line, and also it also just falls in line with maybe the idea of Drake May sitting the first year. I know it's not something that people want to talk about right now with however many months there are until the NFL season, 114 days, 113 days exactly, give or take. But with him trying to learn everything, it sort of falls in that sort of plan. I know Gerard Mayo has said already before that, both of them will be given a chance, but with the way everything's rolling out right now, it seems like Drake May already is showing, some signs of maybe sitting that first year, and that isn't a bad thing. That is what I hoped to have seen from the New England Patriots rather than rushing him. So it seems like they're being very careful about Drake May, and I think that's the way to go. And also, something worth monitoring as we go through OTAs and mandatory minicamp and training camp, how quickly Drake May can learn in about a month. When minicamp will start and when everybody will sort of be back, not really fully practicing, but getting to that next step in the off-season program, how quickly Drake May can pick up the stances, pick up the playbook, and just be a lot more comfortable with it all. I think we'll say a lot about not only him, but the Patriots and how much they're helping out with it. And if he can pick up a lot and heading to minicamp, impressing a lot of people alongside Jacoby Brissett, who will also be now included in the mix with their quarterbacks, I think we'll say a lot about Drake May and how much he not cares about it, but how much he just really is obsessed with trying to perfect everything and trying to learn this playbook. Wanting to go out there and start, I think, is the right attitude to have. And if he does have that attitude, I think he could grow a lot in this next month if he learns the playbook a lot more, and how much really just a quarterback battle this can become. I wouldn't rule out Joe Milton just yet, because other than impressing everybody with his arm strength, he is one of the older rookies in this class. So I think there is something that comes with that, just being older and not being so overwhelmed and so young coming into that situation. I think it's something that could benefit Joe Milton to not be so nervous with more experience, I'll say, under his belt. So that's something to not rule out, Joe Milton sort of playing a part in this quarterback discussion. Jacoby Brissett, I'm sure, is the favorite right now, as he should be. But again, it all plays into what I just talked about in my last point. How quickly Drake May can pick up the offense and how quickly, how night and day he can try to make it be from rookie minicamp to mandatory minicamp and OTAs. If it's a night and day difference, I think a lot more people will start talking about this and taking Drake May more seriously with his bid to be the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots. I'm sure it's something that he wants. Is it the right thing to do? I would probably stick with no as my original answer, but it's just something. If Drake May can prove that he's ready and can show everybody that he's ready, it would be a gamble. I'm sure a lot of people would be surprised, but if he's ready, he's ready. I think throwing out there the quarterback that gives you the best chance to win is never a wrong thing to do, regardless of age or experience. I think how that plays out will say a lot about Drake May and a lot about not only him, but Gerard Mayo having the confidence to throw out their rookie. I'm just speculating right now, but it is something that will be on my mind as the rest of these mini camps roll out and as OTAs start rolling in. We're starting to pick up a little bit of the pace here throughout this offseason. It's grueling without no football, but we are inching closer and closer with each and every day. But with saying that, that will do it for me on today's episode. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show specifically, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for YouTube shorts that are posted every day. The full live recorded shows are all on both of those channels as well. And also individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch an entire live episode, the individual segments are put out there as well on both channels if you want to watch a specific topic. As a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me today, and I hope to see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.